Viking Theatre in Clontarf with the director of a fabulous new play that's being performed over the next week, 10 days or so. Aoife Spillane-Hinks. Aoife, welcome to...
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Aoife, it's a small venue. Is this your first time here? Or?
No, this is my second time working in the Viking. I directed a play called Pilgrim that ran here about 2 years ago, written by Philip Doherty and performed by Rex Ryan, one of the Clontarf locals.
It's what we would call an intimate venue in that
Yes.
sense of the word. So there's
Yes.
no really escaping. It's almost like the audience and the performers are one. Does that require particularly a different style of direction?
Well, one thing that it requires is for the actors to be really comfortable with being very close with the audience. So there's one part of the play when one of the actors sits at the edge of the stage and speaks directly to an audience. It's supposed to be a big audience full of people at a literary event, and actually she's got somebody staring her right in the face, right in the audience. So these actors have to be very comfortable with being aware of the audience in a way that in most theatres you're not going to have that awareness.
Sure. And if we have a look at the set, I mean, it's very
Yeah.
colourful. It's compact, but it's very colourful, and
Yes.
it grabs the attention.
Absolutely, and at the minute we have all of the books are missing. We're currently doing some last minute touch-ups, so it's even more colourful normally.
So
Yes.
I presume then the books are going to give you some hint of what the storyline is about, or at least the environment, is it?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
The play itself, Collected Stories, it's not necessarily one that's well known in Ireland, but it is very well known in the US. It's been highly rated. It was up there for Pulitzer. It played Broadway. It's played the West End.
Yeah.
How did you come across it?
Well, the funny thing is that I grew up in New Haven, Connecticut, where the playwright Donald Margulies lives. And as a high school student, I worked with him just in a couple of workshops when he came into my performing arts high school, and we did some classes with him over a couple of days. I would have gotten to know his plays, having seen them when I was younger, but then I started to read them over the last couple of years more intensively, and then actually in the Viking, 2 summers ago, they said to us, my company, then this theatre, which I run with the actress FitzGerald, they said to us, do you want to do a couple of readings? And we said, sure. And then we said, why don't we do 3 readings of Donald Margulies' plays and see how they do? And this was the one that was the most popular, Collected Stories.
That's interesting. Yes.
Yeah, so it's sort of popular demand.
Yep.
Yeah.
Help me out on this one.
Yeah.
Donald Margulies, I see, is very much an East Coast playwright in that sense of the word. He comes from what we would almost say that Jewish intellectual tradition that comes out of New York. How am I doing?
Yes. Well, and you could say he's probably bi-coastal, because he has big relationships in California as well. But you think about him certainly as a coastal playwright. And yes, his work is, I mean, he's Jewish himself, but he's very much coming out of that intellectual tradition of enthusiastic and ecstatic interrogation and debate. His work tends to deal with Judaism as a cultural as well as a religious element to people's lives. It's certainly in evidence in this play. One of the, you have this central relationship going on in this play where you've got Ruth Steiner, this imperious bohemian famous fiction writer, and her young protege named Lisa Morrison. And one of the things that happens in the play is that Lisa ends up stealing this secret story from Ruth's life and turning it into her big novel, her big breakthrough star-making novel. And part of that novel has to do with taking on a persona of this Jewish woman living in the frenzied 1950s, 1960s New York, meeting Allen Ginsberg and Delmore Schwartz and John Berryman. And so part of the idea of the play is the question of appropriation and of a young, Protestant, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant woman saying, my life isn't rich enough, I have to take on this idea of authenticity and richness that this Jewish woman has.
All I could say to that is, oy vey.
Or as Ruth would say, oy gewalt.
From my understanding of particularly American Jewish writing, language is incredibly important, and I suspect that becomes important because English isn't necessarily a first language for in some of the households in that sense of the word. How important is language in this play?
Well, it's funny that you raised that question, and it's funny that you put it up in those terms, because while Yiddish is not a huge part of the play, it is coming through, it's a thread that goes through the whole play in specific moments. And so you've got this idea of this cultural presence linguistically that's going on in Ruth's expressions that occasionally gets picked up by Lisa. And then of course you've also got the layer of these are writers. These are people talking about writing, talking about words. And one thing that I find very interesting about the element of language in the Irish context is that the presence of Yiddish in it is so similar to the way that people relate to Irish in English, you know? And it, like my stepfather is Jewish, and his father's first language would have been Yiddish, and he wouldn't have spoken English until primary school. And the way in which I've always had a sense of Yiddish in their lives is very similar to my Irish family's life of just, you know, you're going to say guna instead of dress. You're going to say schlep instead of haul myself down. You know?
It's fascinating you should say that, because my language is peppered with Yiddish, even though I don't speak Yiddish, because I find it such an onomatopoeic expression. And it's, you know, even when you use a word, you don't understand a word, you tend to know what it means by the sound. So if you call somebody, say, a schmuck, not complimenting them. Do you think you've had an initial preview run last night? How was that aspect of it received by a Dublin audience?
Well, it's interesting because that isn't something that's come up in conversation yet. And it's one thing that, I mean, personally, I find it very interesting because there's such an interesting conversation in American plays about Jewishness and about that whole idea of culture and authenticity that I think would be very relevant in conversations within Ireland. And I'm interested to see, although last night it didn't come up, people talked a lot about the characters and the relationships, I'm interested to see if that does come up more and more as people start to see the play.
Something that was put to me by a very famous Israeli, I won't name drop here, but when I made a point to this person, I said, I raised a point about Judaism, and he said, he looked at me straight away and said, Judaism is a culture with a religion attached. And I felt I could identify with that in the sense that I would suggest Irishness is a culture with a religion attached as well. Do you think if people get to grasp that point, that they would get that much more richness out of this particular play?
I do. And here's one of the things that I love about that aspect of the way in which Margulies deals with Judaism, is that it is so, I mean, as you touched on the Jewish intellectual tradition. This is a play about the coming of age of a young person under the tutelage of an older person who practices the same craft as she does. But the other thing, beyond learning how to be a writer, is Lisa watches the way that Ruth, coming out of a Jewish intellectual tradition, can argue in a way that is passionate, that is absolute, but is delightful. It's at the end of the conversation, at the end of the argument, you're still enjoying yourselves and your brunch and your coffee as much as you were at the beginning. You're not angry at the person, but the fights are about the passion of ideas and the joy of investigating the possibilities of ideas. And that is something that is so Irish.
Well, the other bit is the other element of it as well, and I'm looking forward greatly to seeing it, is that the two cultures, what they're particularly well known for, strong women. You know, in fact, here we have one character who is Jewish, one character who isn't, and it'll be fascinating to see how they interplay.
Absolutely. And the idea of being a confident, forthright woman is one that comes up within the first couple of minutes in the play. Because the younger woman speaks in that way that we've all heard young women speak, where she talks and the ends of her sentences go up, as if she's asking a question all the time. And so Ruth, after a few minutes, she says, "Can I ask you something? Do you know that you're doing this?" And that idea of saying, "Listen, And she says to Lisa, listen, pretend I'm your mother telling you to sit up straight. Tell me to drop dead, but do it. Just do yourself a favor and start acting like a grown woman. Start presenting yourself like you believe what you're saying, not asking someone else for permission. And that idea of a one woman teaching a younger woman not just how to write, not just how to play the game of literary success, but how to actually be an adult in a way that's beyond just being pretty or being liked, but being present is so important.
Tapping into the tradition, tapping into continuity.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell me, just based on the characters that you've mentioned, Schwartz and Ginsberg and people like that, it suggests to me that what Margulies had in mind was late 50s, early 60s, that what we would call the beat period.
Yes.
How am I picking on that one?
Absolutely, yeah. And there's a huge part of the play in which Ruth ends up telling a story about this time.
Okay.
And the way in which she transports you back, and we actually had a fellow in the audience last night who was alive and was in New York. He was a 20-year-old guy in New York at that time, and he said, I was right back there. You know, and so it's seeping into every word of the play, and especially at these moments when Ruth opens up and brings us back straight to 57, 58.
Again, it's a period that I think is it deserves a reappraisal, because it was a particularly, I would suggest, influential period. I've always said to people the hippies couldn't have happened without the Beats, and again, in that sense of the word, it did tend to be an East Coast phenomenon initially, and dare I say it, huge Jewish influences through Ginsberg and people like Delmore Schwartz. Again, unfortunately, well, I'll leave it to others to decide whether it's unfortunately, most people remember that period through Kerouac, who described himself as a solitary Catholic mystic. Yet it seems to be the cross-fertilization of these two cultures that tend to bring forth, as we say, the treasures.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You've got a long, as we say, a long tradition of working with Maeve. Maeve plays the younger character, what we call the Shiksa character.
Yes, exactly. She is the Shiksa. Yeah.
Is that important to, as I say, to have an artist that understands your way of working?
Absolutely. And because Maeve and I run the company together, there's an ethos and a culture of work that we can both maintain together. Part of that has to do with the fact that we both are devoted to text. We're devoted to illuminating great texts rather than trying to impose too much onto them. We're also devoted to creating circumstances under which actors can do their best work. So we're very much about finding ways to communicate in ways that are effective, productive, and ethical as a collaborative group.
Sure.
So it's an incredibly challenging play, and it's incredibly dense and doesn't let you sit back for 1 minute as an actor. So having one of the actors be somebody who I have a pre-existing relationship with and vocabulary with was incredibly important. And then working with Breed and Nyachten as well in that process we had a lovely discovery that she was very similar in the same way of rigorous work with the text, with one another in a collaborative way.
Well, as Maeve's in the outside, it's almost a home game, really,
yes,
isn't it?
Yeah.
The last time I saw Maeve was in as Ophelia up at DCU, so I'm looking forward to seeing her in a more contemporary piece. Yeah.
Well, she is fantastic.
Yeah. Aoife, I'm going to let you get back to work because you're very busy preparing for the next preview and the week ahead. We look forward immensely to seeing collected stories by David Margolis down here at the very intimate venue. You're advising people to book early.
Yes, yeah. We've already had a very big demand, so I'd say book early to avoid disappointment.
Yep. Aoife Spillane-Hinks, we wish you to break a leg on this one, and look forward to coming along in the next day or so and seeing collected stories. It seems a fabulous play, a period I love, and what more can I say?
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aoife.